Welcome back to the Working Audio Tools podcast, the home of all things audio, and mixing and rabbit holes are what we seem to be doing at the moment. And today we have a fresh rabbit hole for everyone, which we've all been down. We're all probably still going down it, and Paul and I have been thinking about this in ridiculous detail, analytical detail, as always, in a search for what we covered in the last couple of episodes, which was mixed translation, which, as you will all know as well, is the holy grail of quality high-end mixing. The subject of today's episode is going to be the dreaded room acoustics. And at this point, half the audience have left because they're bored. But actually, there's quite a lot that we've learned that is definitely worth considering. But sometimes, you just have to give up, don't you, Paul?
Oh, yeah, big time. Jesus Christ. What a rabbit hole. What a rabbit hole.
But before we get into that, a little word from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Baby Audio, the maker of creative instruments and effects for music production. Baby Audio plugins are about solving problems and adding character to your mix. From the flexible, soulful and color-driven BA1 synth to the Compact Delay Kit module for quick and versatile delay effects. Now, I've left a link in the description to one of my old videos, bear with, of this delay plugin, so check it out and get 15% off any order with our special Working Audio Tools VIP code WAT15. Go to babyaudio.io to learn more. Get 15% off with the WAT15 code at checkout. So, Paul, room acoustics. I have been on a journey in my room, and I'm actually doing a video series on it on my channel, documenting this, going into details. But actually, as I keep writing these videos, I'm learning more stuff, making me think that the videos I've done are almost irrelevant, but they're not irrelevant because they are indicative of the time when I was writing them. So the journey never ends, and basically it's frustrating. And as I said in the intro, I've got to a point where I've basically given up, and Trinov is doing the heavy lifting, and that's as good as I can get this room. We're subject to a big change that we'll talk about later in the episode.
Yeah, room acoustics is something that is a minefield, and the biggest advice that I think me and Ed can give to you if you're starting out your journey, or again, you might be halfway through it, or you're thinking about tweaking your room, is that there's no such thing as a perfect room. It doesn't exist. You can pay people, acousticians, thousands and thousands, and they're only going to get it, to a certain, level of flatness. There's so many different things to consider in a room. You've got to consider the size, and that is, again, how tall is it? So again, height-wise, I'm very fortunate because my ceilings are 3.5 meters high. It's something that Ed, when the last time me and Ed were in London, Ed said to me he was speaking to somebody at Gearfest, and they said, what was it? Was it 4 meters, Ed? That they said that's kind of the optimal height.
Yeah, that was Aidan from Praxis Audio, who basically said you're going to have a null at about 100 unless you've got a ceiling taller than 4 meters, which is obscene. Who has that?
Well, I'm actually quite close to it, 3.5. I have noticed that every room in my studio does measure pretty well. So I do think that the height is actually benefiting me. My ceilings are essentially a meter taller than most houses, most buildings, because you will find that 2.4 is a very standard height. Ed's is 2.1, so his is a little bit shorter. But there are many things that you can do to try and mitigate for, a lot of the limitations that you're going to have. Now, we're not acoustics insider, right? We're not acousticians. But what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and give you, a bit of experience here because, I've had 3 rooms that I've had to treat. Ed's had his room. And again, you did have to treat your home studio as well, Ed, didn't you? When you were doing your early YouTube stuff.
Yeah, my home studio, when my studio for YouTube was in my bedroom, measured better than this room.
Yeah.
For one simple factor, I think, which is that at the back behind me, there was a big mattress and double curtains absorbing stuff. But B, that it was a great big window covering one wall. So all the low end was going out. But also I had the Neumann KH120s and they don't really go below 50 hertz. So there wasn't any significant low end build-up or problems, whereas the PSIs go down to 30 hertz and they're flat down to 40 and then they go down to 30. That's just the tops, and then the sub goes down to 28 flat. So there's a lot of low end, and there's a big build-up at 40 to 50 hertz, which Trinov can take out of the system. It's better to take frequencies out than it is to try and fix a null and put them back in and load the room and the speaker with more energy that then's going to cancel itself out anyway. There's a lot of debate about that. But as Paul was saying, there is no perfect room. One of the best rooms we've been in LA still had a null in the middle of the room, admittedly by, 3 dB?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Something, I can't remember what frequency it was, kind of a low-mid thing, where it thinned out right in the middle, but the rest of the room was remarkable. But then, I dread to think how much that studio costs.
Thousands upon thousands, yeah.
So we do what we can, basically. But yeah, did you want to give a rundown of everything we've learned to suggest? Because I was going to do a video on this, everything I've learned about studio acoustics, but then I just thought, well, I'm no expert, I'm going to get trolled.
Yeah, I know.
So I haven't decided if I'm going to do it yet.
Right, let's think about the issues that we've had and how we found ways of combating them. So let's start, with low end, right? Low end is a bugger, right? A massive bugger. Now, as Ed had said, if you've got glass is always going to be your best friend for low end. It's not going to be your best friend for high end because glass is very reflective. So again, I've got a 4.5 meter wall right here. If anybody's listening to the podcast, you're not going to know, but it's on my left-hand side. And it's all glass panels. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 glass panels. Now, I've got them covered up with curtains that I got from Dunelm. They're not as thick as I would like, but they're still doing some, high-end absorption. Now, the great thing with low-end is that I can't really get that much of a low-end build-up in the room because most of the bass is escaping through the glass. So if you've got big windows, that can help. And I've also got a 2.1 meter window that is directly in front of me right now. So there's lots of places for the bass to escape, where if you look at something like Ed's room, for example, it is a very closed room. There is no windows. There is really no place for the bass to escape. So all the bass is going to build up in Ed's room. Now, if you listen to the podcast, you will always hear that Ed's room is unbelievably treated. Like, I don't do any deverb or anything like that on Ed's voice. His room is genuinely that dry. And I know that in terms of like mid to high frequencies, his decay times are just as good as this control room.
Well, my decay times according to Ruse, are basically all below 200 milliseconds. There's a couple of points, I think, at 40 hertz and maybe 70 or something, or 80. The decay time creeps above 200 milliseconds to about 250, but the rest of it is as low as 175 milliseconds. Now, the suggested standard for a professional studio is 200 milliseconds. So my studio is below that on all but 2 frequencies, which is amazing. But that's not the full story, is it?
No, because, well, decay time's only, like, one thing I actually think many people don't talk about is decay time. And the only way you're going to get your decay time down is by putting in absorption, right? So when it comes to you've got absorption and you've got diffusion. Now, if you're starting out, try and just think about absorption first, because if you then add diffusion into it, you can get confused very easily. But
hang on, we could go even further back, explaining the difference between soundproofing and acoustic treatment.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So many people don't understand the difference, and it's fine. I didn't at some point. Soundproofing is what I have in my room, which is a room that traps all the acoustic energy inside the room so it doesn't escape and go out to my neighbours. Paul's room with his windows will be letting low end out. Yes. However, luckily, there's about 7 people in Scotland, so he's not annoying anyone. So he can get away with it. But if you're in a flat in London and you've got windows, I mean, unless you're high up on a high rise, I know someone who's up in a high rise and he's got windows and the low end goes out and it doesn't bother anyone because it just floats off with the crows. But if you're in a lower ground level, you might be annoying neighbours if you're letting the low end out. So that's soundproofing, trapping all the energy in. And then acoustic treatment is what you're doing with that energy and how you can then absolve the problems that energy reflecting around the room creates, because at different frequencies, at different points in the room, depending on the boundary reflections, you will get nulls and hotspots of frequencies that cancel each other out and build up. And this will all be it'll have a null and a hotspot at different frequencies at different points in the room, depending on how the sound waves interact. And there is a great tool for measuring this. Room EQ Wizard, most people have heard of, but there's also a room simulator in Room EQ Wizard, which is fascinating. Just check measurements for a potential different studio location for myself, and I put in the rough measurements of the room, And basically, it's just a whole nother different set of problems.
Yeah.
So I won't be fixing anything I have here. I'll just be embracing different problems. So with the acoustic treatment inside, such as absorbers, diffusers, are there other types? That's basically it, isn't it? Absorbers.
I mean, we can go down the rabbit holes of Helmholtz resonators and stuff like that, but they're very expensive and extremely difficult to make. It's essentially a resonator that will resonate at a certain frequency. So if you've got, say, a certain null at a certain point, you can kind of tune the resonator to a certain frequency, and then that will kind of cancel or counteract the null in your room. That's like
so is that cancellation, right? Because the ARVAs aren't cancellation. What the ARVAs do is they're real-time absorbers, so they like shock absorbers almost.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Which is remarkable. I'm hoping to get Paul from Emerging UK to bring me a couple. I'm not going to be buying them because they're about £3,000 each, and apparently you need 4 of them to be effective. For I think it's 2.5 dB a box you can control in peaks, but you could also just EQ those frequencies out 10 dB. That's debatable. I know. Trollers in the comments about that vague and unscientific explanation. So yeah, you've got the acoustic treatment as well. Now, some people think acoustic treatment's going to stop noise exiting the room. That's not the case. Mass, bricks, mortar,
correct, and
density will stop frequencies going out. Obviously, the lower the frequencies, the denser the material needs to be, or the thicker the material needs to be, given for example, a 40 hertz sound wave is 28 feet, which is in proper measurements about 9 meters, close to 10 meters. So to get a quarter of a wavelength's worth of absorption, with the idea that the low end goes through a quarter wavelength's worth of treatment, hits a wall, and then going back through the treatment then eventually gives you a half wavelength of treatment, which is apparently the suggested effective density of material for acoustic treatment. So obviously at higher frequencies where the wavelengths are so much shorter, you don't need as dense a material. Hence, even controversially, things like foam for the very high end can be reasonably effective.
Yeah.
From a 9 meter wavelength, you need 2.25 meters of
it's crazy. It's ridiculous.
Of absorption just to get the quarter wavelength. Nobody's got a spare 2.5 meters at the back of the room.
No, that's normally as tall as as long as some people's rooms are. It's crazy. Yeah, but I think now we are going very deep into it because it's very easy to go into deep sciencey stuff. But if we think about the main things that we kind of feel that will help you quick and kind of get you quicker results, things that are just that
maybe we should have started with that.
Yeah,
first reflection points.
Yeah. So normally now, I do suggest that you go to Acoustics Insider on YouTube. Yesko is one of the best, and he's covered a ton of stuff. And even at that, there's still controversy around certain things that he says, and some people will argue till the cows come home. I'm not like that acoustically.
No, that doesn't happen on the internet.
I know it does never happen. People arguing on the internet. Wow. But what I found is one of the biggest things that will help you is bass trapping. Now, the reason that bass trapping is really, really effective is because if you think about when all this energy is coming into a corner, your corners essentially act like a loudspeaker. So again, all this energy comes into your corner and it comes right back out again. Now, if you get bass trapping in, which is essentially, trapping all the bass, trying to trap the energy in the corners, so you're stopping, kind of absorbing the energy coming the
build-up.
Yeah, the build-up. So you have less coming out. Now, in terms of bass trapping, I found that the GIK stuff is the best that I've had. Behind me, I don't know if you'll be able to see it in the video, I don't know, but over my right-hand shoulder, there is a GIK bass trap. I don't know the material that they use, but it does go down very low. The good thing with GIK is if you go on eBay, there's a lot of times you can get some secondhand stuff that they've got, and so obviously I can get it cheaper. It is it's still like 160 quid, but honestly, the amount that brings down the overall reverb time, decay time of the room, it helped some of the low end. So if you can get broadband absorption, definitely in the corners. Broadband absorption can come in the form of various things. I use Rockwell. That's what I've used throughout the studio. In my Atmos room, my decay time is from, I think it's like 150 hertz upwards, all under 200 milliseconds. Like, you can scream to your heart's content in my Atmos room and you won't get even a ping of echo. Even when you play the sweep, it's like the driest I've ever heard the sweep whenever you're even doing measurements. And that was a ton of broadband absorption. But I made sure where I could that I had bass traps in there, because that's when normally if you don't have the budget, get bass traps in first, and you'll be surprised at how much that can help with the reverb time. Now, decay time is very important when it comes to mixing.
Well, hang on, let me just caveat that by saying it does depend on what the problems are.
Very true,
So
yeah.
it is worth getting Room EQ Wizard, or you can do this with Sound ID or Arc or Trinov and measure your room that way. It gives you a graphic of what the frequency response is. And then if you've got, speaker placement is one rabbit hole. And so my point being, identify where the problems are before throwing stuff at the room, because you might create more problems absorbing too much low end, for example.
I'd argue with bass traps. I would argue.
I think it's a safe bet. I agree.
Yeah, I would just say no. Don't even think about it. Just fucking bass trap if you can.
Fair enough.
Just bass trap the corners. Where I do agree with you is everywhere else, in terms of like just putting acoustic treatment everywhere, which is what I did in my Atmos room. But I did it bit by bit. So I would put one panel up and I would measure it, and then I would say, right, did that make any difference? No, let's try it somewhere else. And I was using room mode calculators and stuff like that, and I was trying to see where hotspots would be and then put a panel in that position. And it got to a point where I really did just end up covering the entire room in broadband absorption, which was 2x1 Rockwell panels. I put bass trapper in where I could. But in this
How thick is that?
I want to say 100 mil. I think my panels are 100 mil thick, because I'm pretty sure the wood panels that I had were about 100 mil, I think. Maybe 120, maybe 120 mil. So yeah, say 10 centimeters thick. But obviously, as Ed was talking about density, the more dense that you can, and the more thicker that you can make the panels, the more dense the absorption is going to be. Again, dependent on, the Rockwell that you use. Again, some people use Rockwell, some people use, what the Americans call it, bats. But I've always wondered, is bats their term for Rockwell? Is it still all Rockwell, or is it like a different material?
That's probably their brand, isn't it? Because don't forget, Rockwell is a brand.
Yeah, true, yeah.
That's become a verb. So I think that's their equivalent.
Yeah, so I used Rockwell, and I found that when I was using Rockwell in the rooms, the reverb time would just go down so quickly. And that's what you'll notice first, is that I think to mix in the room, you've got to bring down the reverb time. Like, this room is big, 3.5 meter high. They all are, especially the live room. So you've got 3.5 meter high in this room, and then I've got 4.5 long. No, 4.2 by 3.5. That's the dimensions of this room in meters. So that it's a big room. And I remember there's a video that I made when I was kind of building this room, and I could hear it. The amount of echo and reverb was just like crazy. And the decay time is something that's really, really, really important if you're mixing. Decay time is going to affect your separation in a mix. It's going to, again, the sound stage, it's got a massive, massive, massive impact.
Well, the whole intelligibility of every element of the mix, from the phantom sensor to the stereo imaging to the clarity, the separation. Yeah. So what I kind of focus on is try it where I can to focus on the corners. If I can get bass trapping in, I'll get bass trapping in. And then what I'll do is I'll listen and I'll do the clap test, and I'll do some, some sweeps and some measurements. And I'll try and find where the issue is coming from. And I'll try and find the frequency. Like, I remember in this room, I was doing the clap test, and I had this really bad flutter echo. Flutter echo is like when I hear honestly, see, trying to treat these rooms, I hear it everywhere I go now. See, when you're in like bedrooms and you're in like other people's houses, and I'm in my head going, this sounds fucking shit. Oh my God, that's flutter echo. I'm like that in restaurants and bars. If I find it really hard to speak to people, I just think, okay, I need to go outside or something. And it's amazing that, see, when you start treating the room and you start hearing that decay time come down, you start hearing the reverb time come down, and all of a sudden it's getting drier and drier and drier. All of a sudden you really start honing in on it. And like, because that Atmos room is so unbelievably dead, it made me work harder at this room. Because I was like, it's funny because people would walk in my room and they'd be like,
oh wow, this is super dead. Wow, this is super dry. But because the Atmos room was so good, I was like, no, I can get it better. And I worked at it and I worked at it. And, I went a bit OTT on this room. Like, I've got foam fucking loads of places because I ran out of budget. I do have a really nice wooden paneling that's there from Thomann. That's like absorption and diffusion. But it's annoying because that was where the desk was meant to be. And now
and you've moved it, haven't you?
But that brings us on to the next bit. That you've got all this stuff that you'll get from Acoustics Insider, and again, the type of absorption you're going to use, and again, where you're going to put it, and again, trying to identify hot spots and, flutter echoes and blah, blah, blah to bring the reverb time down. But one of the most important things is your desk position. And the desk position is the thing that I have been like tweaking for, I'd like to say, I spent 2 weeks at it before I went to London. And I had originally, the desk was on the long wall, the 4.5 meter wall, slightly off center, closer to the window. So the window was on the left hand side, but it was a bit further up, which is very, very handy. Like if you're going to have a window, you always want the window to be kind of maybe slightly above your head, which helps because it's 3.5 meter high. So obviously, if you think about if a window is your first reflection point, that's not a very good first reflection point to have as a window, because that's just going to really reflect back. Now, I'm not going to use technical terms on this, you'll notice, because I'm just not an acoustician and we are not pretending to be. But what I found was that when I put the desk in its optimal position in this room, which is on the shortest wall, so not the 4.5, the 3.8, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, facing down the room is 3.5, the theory, isn't it?
Yeah. So
facing down the length of the room.
So I've got these speakers with the window behind the speakers, so that isn't really acting as a first reflection point. Speakers are going this way. And where it's actually ended up quite well for me is the acoustic paneling from Thomann. That's actually on my first reflection point of my right speaker. So I've actually ended up quite good there because it's a very good absorber and diffuser. And on the left-hand side, I've got the glass paneling when I've used curtains. So again, I'm getting some high, mid to high frequency absorption from the curtains. And then I've got bass trapping, and I've got bass trapping. And then behind me, as you'll notice, I've got some thinnish acoustic treatment that is kind of more just for show, because the back wall didn't really need that much, really, because it's still, against 4.5 meter long, so it kind of helps. Obviously, the smaller the room you have, the more kind of potential issues you're going to have. The bigger the room you have, it's going to be a little bit harder to get the decay time down, but you'll be surprised why when you get the bass trapping in and you just start being very selective on where you put your treatment. And then ceiling panels as well. It's always recommended that you have a ceiling panel above your desk position, which in my
as a cloud.
Yeah, cloud. That helped in this room. I've got two. So I should have got one, but I got them cheaper because they were B stock, me being me, obviously. So I've got 1.2 by 1.2 meters up top, which does help because, again, you've got the first reflection point of your desk. And that's another ball ache as desks. Desks are one of the monsters of reflections. And it's something that, me and Ed were talking about off air, because we are kind of maybe coming to the conclusion that possibly Ed's Zauer desk is maybe just too big for his room. Because Ed, even you said, and remember when you got it, you were like, fuck, I didn't know it was as big as what it was. And I was like, fuck, that's probably the first time you've ever said that, Ed, in your life. I was like, Jesus Christ, can't believe it.
You owe me for that one. Yeah, well, again, proof that big is not always better. It looks, I got this desk before I'd gone down any of this, before I'd even started looking at new speakers, and it looked good. And I had, my priority was 500 series, three racks of the stuff in front of me, right at my fingertips. It's great, but there is a theme that I've realised on this desk, and I learned this auditioning lots of different speakers, because I actually think I bowed the desk in slightly doing this, because I would have one set of speakers, basically because it's so high, it's something like, quick measurement, because I can't remember, it is about, the top of the desk where the speakers sit is about 1 meter and 5 centimeters up. So for my listening height is about 1 meter 31 when I'm not slouching.
Right, so that's higher than normal. It's normally 1.2.
Yeah, so I'm in the top half of the room with my listening position, as it were. But so I have to have the speakers horizontally. Sorry, and a lot of people question me on this. And when I got the PSIs, I had the tweeters in, blah blah blah. Now settled on tweeters out. Video on that coming. But what I realized when I was testing speakers, I'd had them vertically, and I think it was when I had the ATCs and the PSIs in. Now, bear in mind that is about 56 kilos of speaker on each side of the desk. I definitely think I bowed it in the middle slightly. The speaker at the top always sounded considerably better. And it was then that I was starting to learn about desk reflections. I mean, talk about late in my career learning this stuff. Just hadn't been a thing because my other desk before that was very flat, and the Neumann, I just didn't like the Neumanns anyway. So there is a thing where the higher up in the room the speakers are, the better they sound. But it is definitely desk reflections. Where the Amphions are on top of the PSIs now, there's just a space up there where it sounds good, but they're also way less subjective to desk reflections. And when I had the Amphions vertically either side of the screen, it sounded awful, and I couldn't fix it. And I don't have enough stereo license as from Trinov to put it through that. And I refuse to buy another Trinov license just on principle. On the desk level, they don't work. It sounds awful. So the more I'm thinking about it, the more I am realizing the big, beautiful desk might not be practical.
Yeah, I know. And what I find
which
interesting...
is a pain.
Yeah, it is, and I feel for you because for anybody that doesn't know, that is a heavy fucker, and it took Ed like quite a lot to get it in. I remember you had to get help to get it in the first place.
I know, I did a very unmanly thing, didn't I, and asked for help.
Yeah.
There's a video on that as well on my channel, which is actually quite entertaining. I did try and make that slightly humorous.
But to put it into context, so what did you say the desk is 1.8, 1.9 wide?
1.9 meters wide.
Right, 1.9 meters wide, and Ed's room is, what did you say to me?
2.95 meters wide.
2.59 wide. So if you think about...
No, 2.95.
2.95, right? So if you think about nearly 3 meters, call it, right? So if you think about it, he's basically given himself maybe 50 centimeters play either side. You know what I mean? Because Ed's going to obviously have the desk in the middle of the room. So, again, 50 centimetres either side. Yeah, it's very close. And how far have you got the desk from the back wall? Because that's something that, again, you need to think about as well.
Right up against the back wall. And the speakers are right up against the back wall. And they measure better against the back wall.
Which makes sense as to why you have such a big bass build-up. Because you then have to get into the realms of boundary interference. So, boundary interference could be your friend. Because... sometimes what you can find is that the closer, especially if you have, say, front-ported speakers, and that's another thing to put into context, is that if you've got rear-ported speakers, you don't really want to have these close to the back wall because there's a lot of issues. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I just know there is a lot of issues that can be caused having a rear-ported speaker too close to the back wall. So that's why many modern studio speakers will have front-ported, so you can have them closer to the back wall. But having them closer to the back wall means that you will get more build-up in the low end. So a lot of the times what you can find is that you're normally having to fight against a null or you're trying to fight against too much low energy build-up with the speakers being close to the back wall. Now, there are DSP settings on a lot of studio speakers. Kale does it, and again, they're like kind of budget speakers, but they've got a lot of DSP options that you can use EQing just to kind of take that out. But it does seem to be a modern consideration that you've got to do, where you've either got to pick one. You've either got to pick the null, or you've either got to, have a bit of a bass build-up. Now, me and Ed, I think we agree on this, that in our heads anyway, we are the school of it's better to have to EQ out a low-end build-up than it is to boost and correct a null. Because if you've got, say, like a 6, 7, 8 dB null, let's say 80 to 100 hertz, what the correction is doing, the correction is going to boost that by 8 to 9 dB in most cases. Sonar works well. So what you're doing is you're pushing a lot of low energy into that speaker, and you're making the speaker work harder, and already all the THD is in the low end. So you're pushing the speaker even harder, and again, depending on how much headroom the speaker has, which is important, you can actually be pushing more distortion into the speaker to fix a null. And then all of a sudden, that THD then ripples further up, and then all of a sudden, you lose clarity, and you've got a bit more of a coloured speaker, which is again affecting your mid-range, is affecting everything.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's also one of the key differences between cheap and expensive speakers will be their headroom capabilities and their ability to handle so much extra voltage, so much extra low end output that they need to put out. So that was a terrible explanation, but you get the idea. The more expensive speakers with better amps will have a higher headroom, so they can absorb the higher input to supposedly alter the null. But the problem is that nulls don't work that way.
No, they don't.
Nulls are basically a black hole void of that frequency is not existing in this room.
Yeah, so it's a phase cancellation, you know what I mean? They're actually, it's cancelled out. So
it doesn't matter how much you throw at it, it's just more of it's going to cancel. To an extent. Now, what I need to do is measure my room post Trinov. Because I need to measure how much harmonic distortion the PSIs are producing, which I think might be a fair bit, because they do have a very rich low end that I like. It's not the cleanest low end, I have to admit, but I also want to know what that null is like after. Now, it's telling me the perceived after, which is virtually flat. I mean, within a dB across the whole spectrum. After Trinov, that is.
But it's having to do a hell of a lot of processing.
So Trinov is doing some heavy lifting in that my null in my left speaker, which is 5 dB worse than my right speaker. We suspect, and I say we, I've spoken to Chris Allen at Room Sonics about this, and Aidan at Praxis Audio, and M said this as well. He just said it's probably the fact that there's a door on that side and there's a change in the material density on that side of the wall, and maybe 100 hertz is getting out. The other thing I need to do is measure with the door open, because with the door open, there's a vast dip of something in the system. It sounds really strange. And I suspect it's just all the 100 hertz is going out the door. Would make sense if it sounds worse when the door's open. So Trinov is getting my room flat to within 1 dB, but the problem is at 100 hertz, it is doing 13 decibels of work on the left speaker.
That's a lot.
And 8 decibels of work on the right speaker. And it doesn't matter where I've put the speakers, where I've put the subwoofer. Trust me, I have tried everything in this room. That null is not getting any better. The only way it could get better, according to Ruse and the Ruse room simulator, is if I sit way back here. For those people watching on YouTube, hello. In the middle of the room. Anyway, that's the null. So I do wonder how much of this null is to do with the desk. I have one more thing to try, Paul, actually, which is I bought some thick floor. You'll know about flooring.
Yes.
According to SSL, you know all about flooring.
Yeah, quality, yeah.
And I've got some underroll that I might just try on the surface of my desk to see if that helps absorb some of the 150 hertz. But what am I saying? As I say that out loud, 150 hertz is the desk reflection frequency, everyone tells me. Even PMC have a setting in their speakers. It's desk mode, which just dips, I think, 3 dB at 100, or is it 4.5, at 150 hertz. And that apparently alleviates the desk reflections. And actually, when I tried the PMC 6s, it does work quite well.
Focal, the Shape 65s, they're the same. I think theirs is 180. I think it's 180 and it goes down to 4 dB, and I've got it right down. And that's what you've got to be mindful of, is that as soon as you put a desk in, you're always going to have some form of compromise in there. And that's just something you're going to have to deal with. That's why, as Ed said, a lot of these speaker manufacturers have, DSP, and their Kali's got the same. And it's normally, say, like a dip around 150, 180. Now, one thing I want to mention about my control room is that if you use too much high-end absorption, if you're not taking out so much, I think from my absorption, I think the ones I bought from Amazon, this is the budget I had left for the studio, it could go down maybe to 500 hertz. Sometimes you get some that are like 1K up. So if you're absorbing really, say, from 500 to 1K up, then essentially think about your lower mids, say like your 150 all the way up to, say, sometimes maybe 600, 700. That's not being absorbed as much. which is one of the reasons why my room has a bit of a low-mid build-up. So I've got the low-mid build-up from the desk reflections, but I've also got a build-up because I've done too much absorption in the high-mid to highs, and I've kind of not absorbed the low-mids enough. I've got the bass trapping that's doing it. I've got the bass trapping over there that's doing it. The tone there, that goes down to, I think, 300 hertz. But there are still gaps in here. Like, again, the curtains on that entire wall, again, that's only going to be absorbing probably, I don't know, maybe 1K upwards if I'm lucky. So there's all these compromises that you're going to have. And, to get a room measuring completely flat, you're probably going to need something like my Atmos room, which doesn't have a desk in it. I generally just have the tiniest, smallest little table. And I know that that's one of the benefits of the Atmos room, is that I have the tiniest, smallest little table, and I don't have that interacting with the room. Same with the live room. But I just kind of find that when you're starting out, just try and do what you can first to get your desk in the position. Emra said this to me at the start. He said, Paul, get your desk in the position without any treatment where music just sounds the best. I know it's not the most scientific, but just put it where you're like, the music sounds best here. Then you can start measuring, and then you work from there. And another thing I want to mention that is important, that I found is a good improvement, is if you isolate your speakers, if you use something like ISO Acoustics. When I was doing measurements of all the speakers I've had in this room, every time I used the ISO pucks, it improved the decay time. And I was very surprised at that. And it did make quite a noticeable difference, to the point where I had maybe the odd peak in like decay time going up. But with the ISO Acoustics, it was like almost ruler flat. And I was like, okay, that isn't a gimmick. I could hear it, but it measures that as well.
Oh no, they're massively effective. Yeah.
It's another thing.
You can hear it. You don't even need to measure it. You put your speakers on ISO acoustic pucks or frames, and you can absolutely hear it. That's a good point. If you don't have an in-house mastering engineer like we're fortunate enough to have with Marcel at Actu Make with the working audio tools, DistroKid have you covered. For just $99 a year, you can buy unlimited mastering for all of your tracks in tandem with unlimited releases via DistroKid. Mixair from DistroKid uses AI technology to measure the EQ and the dynamics of your track, and then present you with numerous options to tweak and customize your master. You can flip between the original and the generic mastered option.
Blame it on the whiskey, blame it on the bad weed.
So instantly we can hear that's making the track louder, and it's also slightly flattening the EQ, bringing in a little bit more of the mid-range and of course the top end. We can adjust the intensity, which is how much compression and limiting is being applied to the track.
Blame it on the only thing you've ever seen. Run and tell your mother. Blame it on your brother.
I think somewhere in the middle works for this track. And the EQ options are self-explanatory. We can make the track effectively duller or brighter.
Just ain't right. All you do is lie. All you do is try to deny. All you do is lie. Even when you know it just ain't right. All you do is lie.
Download your mastered track and release it as easily as you do all of your other unlimited uploads. Get 30% off your DistroKid subscription using the Working Audio Tools VIP link below. If you're wondering where to start with this for your room, Paul's made a great suggestion. Moving the speakers around to find where they work best is a good option. And then what you want to look at is measuring the room with Ruse ideally, and figuring out what frequencies are causing problems, and then finding room acoustic treatment accordingly. Now, GIK is in the UK is very good for, genuinely is very good for this. And you need to be looking at the absorption coefficients of the products they've got, which is basically how efficient that material is, and that density and that thickness is at different frequency points, which brings me to my favorite controversial topic on this, which is foam. There's some insane snobbery towards foam and acoustic treatment. I understand that, because the reality is it is of zero effectiveness under, I don't even know what, at least 2 kilohertz, probably 5 kilohertz. But in my bedroom studio, when I was naive to all this and started out, I had a lot of flutter echo. You know, if you clapped in the room, you know, I thought sorting the clap out was, you know, something you ordered online. Not clapping in your room to find frequencies.
Lol.
But the upper frequencies, like 5K and above, foam does absorb. It does do a good job. So my other room was actually quite dead, certainly in the vocal register frequencies. Not as dead as this room is. This is, you know, I could die in here and nobody would ever know.
Yeah,
So if you don't hear from me. Yeah.
But and as well, you raise a good point, right? Is that the money is in the mid-range, you know what I mean? So if you can at least focus your room, and if you don't have the budget, at least get as much kind of high-density foam. Now, it's very difficult, because if you go to Amazon, right, you look at the spec sheet, they're all going to say, yeah, it's got a coefficient of this, and it absorbs down to 500 hertz, and you're like, fuck off. And it comes, and you're like, I can genuinely just like, I could put my finger through this shit, it's that thin. So no, it's not dense.
I'm surprised that didn't trigger something on Riverside there. Like
where's my fireworks? Where's my fireworks? I've not had my fireworks in a while.
What an episode that was.
I know, great episode. But another thing that's very important that I'm actually going to do tomorrow, because I cannot stop tweaking the Atmos room, because I've got this 3 dB null. And Ed's like, are you fucking serious?
Fucking arsehole.
3 dB null on the low end. It's like, I would kill for that. But
Paul's not just got one room that he's got flat to within plus or minus 2 dB. He's got 3 of the fuckers.
yeah, no.
I can't even get one flat to whatever it is.
Now, but this room's the hardest one. Like, this was the one where I had to get all optimal. I mean, I was moving the desk back inches, like move, measure, left, right, because I was trying to mitigate the null, because there is a 100 hertz null in this room. And exactly where I've got the desk right now is the best position where I can mitigate the null and I can get enough bass boundary interference. So with the focal shape 65s, the passive radiators, it completely bypasses the null that the Calais get here. But if I put the Calais slightly out and I kind of toe them in a little bit like that, then I normally find that the low ends, I mean, see, nulls are so annoying, because you could you could move a speaker maybe like 10 centimeters, and all of a sudden you've brought your null down by fucking 3 dB, and then you move them even wider, and all of a sudden you're like, oh fuck it, this isn't even an issue anymore. And then you move it slightly back and you're like, oh shit, there's a 6 dB null, like, and it genuinely, it's like it's like a puzzle. And I find acoustics like a puzzle, where you're just trying to get everything to fit right. And once you get everything to fit right, and that's only one pair of speakers.
This is why you love this, because it fiddles with your autistic mind, doesn't it? And gives you.
However, Ed, the problem I've got is that I've just not got one pair of speakers, I've got 2. So I had to find a position in the desk where I knew that I could put one there and one there, and I've got to have, see, the focal shapes could be pointed straight at me. Like the passive radiators really do work. But with the edifiers, I've got to have them pointed a lot more towards me, kind of more at an angle, and then I can mitigate that null down to like 2 dB. Where in the Atmos room, this is what brings me to my big point, is that a big thing that you could do to help sort out your low end is a subwoofer. Because the great thing with the subwoofer is you can essentially place it anywhere. So in my Atmos room, I've got a crossover with Audio. So all of my speakers, I can decide exactly how much of that low end, where the cutoff frequency is, where the crossover is. And I was playing about with it before we got on air, and I just wanted to see if I could bring that null down. And then I had it in the corner, because that's where the sub was measuring good. But because the measurements are so much of a pain in the arse with SonarWorks, and I didn't have Veru at the time, I was like, oh my god, no, I'll just leave it. But I was like, no, I've got the Swinger Room EQ Wizard now. And so I brought it out, then I brought it back to the left hand side of the wall, and I'm just bringing it out. And I've had this one pesky little mid-range null. So I've managed to bring the null down to which looks like about 2 dB from 3 dB, and I've managed to fix that one null I had in the mid-range. And that is all just with subwoofer and how loud the subwoofer is and the position of it. Because if you could essentially, the theory is, if you can essentially take your low-end problems and put that into a subwoofer, which you could then essentially move about the room, then you can sort out that big issue. You've got the headroom if it does need some correction, and then overall your speakers are not having to work harder, and it kind of solves all that problem. But then you get into the issue where some people have told me where no matter what you do, and you put the sub in, the sub still got an issue in the room, then you get a stereo subwoofer set, because they say that if you position one subwoofer one way and another subwoofer pointed another way, they could then essentially cancel each other out, or whatever they do in the phase, blah, blah, blah. Then you could actually fix a null by having this 2 sets of stereo subwoofers, and then they cancel each other out. Oh my days. It is a rabbit hole.
You just got me thinking, when I had 2 subwoofers, again, video on this last week went out on my channel, I had stereo subwoofers and it caused... I thought the stereo subwoofers was causing problems. I've since actually figured out it's Trinov. So before I get into that, crossover points. Did you say 70 hertz? Your crossovers
right.
are?
So what I did first was I just stuck very literal to it. So Kali recommended 80 hertz. Well, when they say recommend, if you use the Kali WS 6.2,
a lot of people suggest starting there. Yeah.
So with the Kali system, you don't have a choice. It's like the Kali LP range and IN5s. All the Kali range is basically set to cross over at 80 hertz, so it works perfectly with the sub. So the two of them meet in the middle. So I was like, right, okay, I'll just do 80 hertz, and that worked incredibly well. But when I had moved the subwoofer out, and then I was like, right, okay, let's just adapt the subwoofer. I changed it from 80 hertz to 75 hertz, and I managed to fix the null even more. But then again, it did cause a little bit more of an issue somewhere else. But I found that it was less of a broadband dip, because I've got quite a wide-ish 3 dB dip. I can't remember where it was. It was maybe 80 to 100 hertz, but I was able to kind of centralize it and kind of make it less. And it's crazy how just 5 hertz of a crossover can make a difference. But it makes absolute sense, because you're essentially taking the low end and putting it in at one set spot. But then against how that crossover interacts with the speaker and where that is in the room, but it can definitely help.
And the type of crossovers I've
the filter
learned.
types, per dB octave slope that you use.
Butterworth or Bessel or Linkwitz Riley. Let's not get into that in this episode.
Totally.
In my room, and Room EQ Wizard's Room Simulator corroborates this, I eventually realised that my subwoofer... Well, I knew this from the Neumann subwoofer days. And speaking of 80 hertz crossovers, the Neumann MA1 system is basically designed to cross over 80, because that sub was designed initially to go with the KH80 speakers, which I don't know if the name's anything to do with it, but don't go below 80 hertz. So hence the sub to go with them. And ironically, they're actually Neumann's best speakers, in my opinion. Really, really flat. So what I realised with the Neumann sub, I tried it off to the left, I tried it in the far corner, and the room just sounded unbalanced. It honestly felt like a listing ship. It was hot. It was horrendous. I couldn't handle it. So I put my subwoofer in the middle, and it sounded great. Now, part of that was I was feeling the haptics, and coming from live sound, I think when I got a sub, I was a bit underwhelmed, like I think a lot of people are, because I think, they're expecting this raging club sound. And they don't really get that. They just get extension further down.
That's all it is.
But having it in the middle does give me those haptics that I quite liked. But acoustically in the room, it works in the middle. Numerous people have chastised me, just saying, yeah, bro, you don't know anything. Fuck off, because in my room, it works in the middle, and that is it. And I've tried it elsewhere. Same with the stereo subs. They didn't work out wide. They didn't work in the corners. That was a disaster. The closer I put them, the better they work, to the point where I just put one of them in the middle. And it is the better sound that I've had. And that meant I could sell one of the subs and free up some cash and buy the Amphions, which are interesting because, as Paul discussed earlier with rear ports or front ports, some speakers, like the Amphions, have passive radiators at the back, and they measure better than the PSIs do at 100 hertz. And I don't think the 100 hertz null is... I personally don't think it's desk related. However, it would stand to reason that the higher up the Amphions are away from the desk, they're not as impervious to the 100 hertz null, or they're not creating problems that are creating the 100 hertz null. Maybe it's the passive radiator at the back that's alleviating that as well. They're dispersing the low end out to the back and not pushing it all forward like the PSIs are doing. It needs someone smarter than me to figure that out. But subwoofer placement for me is limited as well, because the desk, I've got, again, problem with the desk is I can't put it right against the back wall because of a supporting strut along the back, which I didn't notice was there when I ordered it till it turned up, and I was like, oh, that's a problem. So as Paul said, though, stereo placement is a big thing, but yeah, what I'm up against is just a whole different load of problems to Paul, because
big time.
the sub needs to be in the middle of the room. But I mean, if it's not in the middle, the null is worse, so has to be in the middle. So there's some longitudinal issue down my room, also corroborated by the fact that I need the speakers as close together as possible, and tweeters out has definitely helped massively again with the null. So it's all a bit of a bugger, really, and it's all a pain in the arse, because the desk's massive, so it's heavy as fuck with all the 500 series gear in. The speakers are big and heavy, and then you got to measure every time you move something. And with Trinov, you've got to spend a lot of time getting the 3D microphone and the prongs all lined up, and the azimuth correct. Which also brings me to the 30-degree rule. Are your speakers at 30 degrees, or have you just banged them facing at you and you don't really care?
I know. I think there's many things that are kind of seen as rules. Like you've got the what's that rule, Ed, where they talk about how far your speakers should be.
Equilateral triangle.
No, not that. But no, like was it the third rule or whatever? In terms of
the rule of thirds, where your listening position should ideally be just over a third at 38% of the way down the room.
That's bullshit, in my opinion, because it depends on the size of your room. I think that rule will probably work in a certain size of room. You know what I mean? But again, we've all got different sized rooms. So
yeah, again, I measured that in my room, and it measured worse than where I'm sat now, which is bang on 33%. I'm about 1.5 meters away from the back wall, 3 meters away from that wall behind me. 38% measured worse, and according to Rue's room simulator, actually the best place in this room is at 50% in the middle of the room, which, as I demonstrated earlier, is all the way back here. So it's not going to work. So everything is a compromise, and as you found, you moved the sub and it alleviated one problem but causes another one.
Yeah.
There is everything is a compromise. So when you think about the just for the record studios in LA,
totally.
Just think how good a job they've done knowing what we know now.
I know. And I think, what you raise another good point is that it all does really come back to speaker placement, and you'd be amazed that the amount of times that you might be blaming your room when genuinely you've just got the speakers in the wrong position, or you've got the desk in the wrong position. Like what I find with the focals is that I've got them 1 meter apart, because that's kind of what they're designed to be, that's what they're recommended. But again, it depends on how far you sit back. So something that we found interesting was I found that the further back I was, there was more high end from the speakers, and the closer that I am to the speakers, the less low end. High end, the less high end I have in the speakers, and you see it in the measurements. So I try and I think the focals are 1 meter, but I can't get a perfect equilateral triangle due to the desk. I physically can't get 1 meter to 1 meter. So I think it's 1.2 or 1.2 or 1.3. So I'm like 20, 30 centimeters off a perfect equilateral triangle. The edifier's been wider. I've got to sit, but I don't mix on the edifier, so I just use them for listening now. So I know to sit a bit further back. So that's 1.4. So when I calibrate it, I calibrate that 1.4 back, and I know where to sit back for that to be right. So desk positioning and how close you are to the speakers, it's all just like a cacophony of confusion, and it is genuinely, like, we're talking inches here. Like, genuinely, if you get yourself in a roomy Q Wizard, move a few centimeters, you'll get a different result, and it's so difficult. And you can run yourself crazy trying to fix one problem, and then again, as Ed says, you come up with another problem. But again, it's, as Ed did say, right, the best term I would say for acoustics is that it is a battle of compromise. And you've just got to accept your room. You've got to accept the things that you just can't fix due to, your room. Like, Ed has things in his room that he's limited with. He just is. Like, if Ed could take those drums out and the drum kit and all the drum shells, he probably would in a heartbeat. But at the end of the day, he spent a lot of money on the GIK stuff. He bought a lot of stuff from there. And fair play to you, because...
So I didn't really spend that much money on the GIK stuff, because I got it all secondhand on eBay.
Yeah, but you still bought a lot. I knew you bought the... Wasn't it a tube trap, or was it? Did you get the tube traps, or was it the?
I got the big
brick?
square bass traps that go in each corner. Which
you bought the ceiling traps, and again you've got the ones behind you. I think you put some on your first reflection points, didn't you? If I'm right,
I have a video coming about this actually next week. So by the time this episode is out, that will be out. So
yeah, and so you've done the best that you can, and we did notice that it all did help in terms of your decay time. You were like, oh, I can hear the difference with all of them in.
Well, weirdly, Ruse doesn't measure a huge difference in decay time, but it's so audible. I took them out just to check some measurements for this video, and it was massive.
Right.
The intelligibility of the low end. Now there is a bit of a thing where they actually worsen the null at 100 slightly.
Right.
It's about a dB on each side. So there is an argument to take them out. But then it also helps the decay time, and I prefer it with the decay time.
I agree.
Lower.
I'm the same. I prefer less decay, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, fight about that amongst yourselves in the comments, which one you think it should be. But for now, that's the decision I've made. The drums aren't really an issue now because of the treatment that I put around them and on the back wall there. Those big things you can see shining behind me. Yeah, so the drums aren't as big an issue, but even measuring them before and after, I just don't think they were doing too much. Again, it was more what I could hear some
drum resonances
going on when things were mixing. So I was probably over mixing that out at places, which actually would have been affecting my mid-range, which makes sense why I used to have a big scoop in my mid-range. I used to have a DT770 ear, didn't I?
Yeah. And remember as well that all speakers, as much as they say they're flat, you could get two speakers in the exact same position and they measure differently. So again, you've got that to deal with as well. And they're
flat in an anechoic chamber, maybe. And this is something I realised immediately with the PSIs, because I bought the PSIs and then I tried the Ex Machinas, and I'm not going to lie, if I'd done this the other way around, I may not have bought the PSIs, because the PSIs are heavily influenced by the room acoustics. The Ex Machinas are basically like putting on a set of headphones. They just didn't... There was some influence, but it was no way near as much as it is with all analog speakers. That's an interesting thing to consider. And on that subject, I might be renting a set of Ex Machinas, Paul, for a couple of weeks, just to try and... I want to mix on them, see how it works.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. Because at the end of the day, I think that you've had a lot of good experience with the PSIs, and it would be interesting to get your experience on what you hear differently and the decisions that you make, because ultimately we did speak about this a few weeks ago about, you getting the Amphions in and, the difference that you heard.
Love the Amphions.
Yeah. So,
love them.
Yeah, that's definitely for another day, but we'll keep you all updated. But we thought, obviously this is a rabbit hole we've been going down, and we probably still will be going down for probably the next year. But it's important to talk about because, again, I did make a video this week on my channel about how I kind of feel that plugins are starting to become a little bit pointless now if, your room isn't treated, because there's no point spending like fucking 150 quid on plugins on Black Friday when you can get yourself a fucking bass trap and bring the decay time down in your room, or you could spend money and get better monitors, or get a headphone amp, get a better DAC, whatever. It's like all this stuff is so important, and you'd be amazed at how different your mixes will sound in a well-treated room compared to a shitty treated room. And it's a conclusion that I and many others, you included, have came to, that essentially monitoring is more important than fucking plugins. And this stuff is so important. And if you take this thing, mixing, seriously as a career, you should be investing to get the best results. And your room should be one of the first things that you prioritise.
Yeah, I agree. And on the room bombshell, I know there's going to be people saying, move rooms then. I live in London. Do you know how fucking expensive rooms are? Acoustic, like sound rooms, studios in London. It's disgusting. And most of them, I've got horror stories. I've been in, I don't even know how many, I've had lots of studios in London over the last nearly 20 years. And none of them have been remotely acoustically isolated from the next one. Even just mixing, even the producer rooms, and I can name some studios, right, that have been terrible. And people paying a lot of money. I'm talking like between $1,000 and $2,000 for these rooms per month, and they are just basically as soundproof as an open window. It's pathetic. Where my room is good is that it's in an outbuilding at the end of my friend's house, at the end of their garden, sorry, and there's no one around, and the neighbours are around to death anyway, so it doesn't matter. So, and actually, the room has been built quite well in that I can hear drums outside, but I can leave music playing at 90 dB and there's not a whistle outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite well treated. So the option is not to move, because what I pay here is about, 50% more expensive than you're paying for your whole studio, for your 3-room studio in Scotland, Paul.
Yeah, I know. See when I tell people how much... See when I tell people how much I pay for a 3-room, technically it's a 4-room, which is, it is going to be a 4-room because I'm getting the room finally cleared out. I'm paying somebody £100 to clear out all the crap, all the boxes that I've built up, because it gives me anxiety just looking at it. I'd rather just pay somebody.
Is that in the form of weed then?
Nope.
That's a separate room.
That's a separate
And then
room.
there's a 5-star luxury toilet up at Paul's studio,
which is plasterboarded and painted now. It is painted now.
Better be by the time I visit.
There is a roll of toilet roll, don't worry, there is. I bought it yesterday.
Fuck me. Luxury. Not just a piece of bark.
No, not just a piece of bark, no, there is. Well, I can't guarantee it's going to be 2-ply. It'll be fucking 1-ply.
Another reason Scotland needs to stay in the British Union. Let's not go there.
Let's not go there.
So, the option for me to move studios is not a thing, sadly, not economically. There is another option, which I won't go into, but that may materialise later, early next year. We'll see. But like I said, that's why I was looking at room simulators on Ruse, and it'd be a different size room. It'd just be a different load of problems.
Yeah.
What a couple of people have said to me now is your desk is a problem. But for me to take out this desk, remove all the speakers, take all the modules out, break down all the cabling, physically break down the desk, because I can't get it. Can't even twist it upright. It just won't go that way, as you would have seen in that video, the Mazor video. It's going to be, I just imagine 7 to 10 day job, 5 to 8 days at least to turn the studio around again, recable everything. Fuck that. But then, as someone did point out, well, what's like a week of your time versus a lifetime of problems?
Correct. Very good point.
Which is a good point. However, I don't know by swapping the desk is going to be expensive. Buying something else, knowing my annoyingly expensive taste.
You'd have to get, see in your room, you would have to get like a floor rack.
I think I'd get a mastering.
Series.
I'd have to get a mastering desk.
Yeah, you would.
Of some kind that's small and compact, and then just have units on the side of the analog gear, which is appealing. But it's expensive and it's time consuming. And like I alluded to, I'm not quite sure how much longer I'll even be here, so we'll see.
But the thing is, right, even if you do move to another room, that desk is still going to have less desk reflections.
If I moved rooms, the desk would go. That for definite.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I would have to be moving this stuff out anyway.
Yeah, true.
So the desk would go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks great, but yeah, it's causing problems. But the annoying problem is I could change the desk at great expense and time consumption, and I don't know what benefit it would give me. I can't measure it. Mm. So it might be that I don't get any. It might be that the 100 hertz null is still there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you
mean.
So
it's such a massive risk for really no guarantee. Yeah. So I'm really reluctant to do that.
New room, I think we all know new room is probably going to be the best for you if you can. London's difficult, and I do feel for Ed that he is in a place that's just everything's so fucking expensive. It's just stupid. It's ridiculous. Sickening.
But even, I mean, there's a YouTuber, I won't mention him, but he's done a video with some speakers that fixed themselves in the room and they were flat. And he's still got a 10 dB null at 100 hertz.
Yeah, I know, yeah. It's crazy.
And this is a prolific mastering engineer. So it's just a case of accept. Like, I'm at a point now where Trinov does enough for me to accept what it is. I'm not sure the PSIs work for me in a mixed translation sense, the way I need them to. The Amphions are great, can't get enough of them. So it might just be a case of using them all for what they are, as we discussed last week regarding hybrid monitoring. Everything has a function, and I might just have to embrace headphone mixing a little bit more for the low end control,
which is really common.
I'm getting my head round because the Hyperman and Nanda Nanos kick ass in the low end.
Told you.
Like Paul Third is not wrong when he says these things, and I'm going to do a video about that as well at some point. By the way, Paul.
Well,
and
all
it's
the
going to
things.
be a massive. It's going to be a hugely clickbait title. It's going to cause some controversy, but then
Paul
it'll
Third
be
is wrong.
No, it's going to be worse than that. I'm going to go all in, mate. Anyone who watches it is going to think, fucking hell, they've really fallen out.
Gearslots will have its own thread and everything. Finally, Ed Thorne has spoken the truth.
No, but the video will be endearing of your annoying ability to say, right, mate, you need to do this. And I'll be like, fuck off, Paul, I'm not interested. Right, you need to do this. Stop being stubborn. Right, I'll try it. Yes, he's right. Okay.
Yep. Happens all the time. Don't worry about it. And on that bombshell, we'll see you again next week.
It's been emotional.